Three girls were manufactured in a laboratory. They were given no mother. They were raised by a single father who was also their creator, a man who never once asked if they were okay. One became a compulsive perfectionist who suppresses every emotion she has. One became pathologically sweet until she snaps and screams at a frequency that shatters glass. One became incapable of expressing anything except rage and contempt. And every villain they fought was a mirror of the psychological damage their own creator inflicted on them. The Powerpuff Girls wasn't a superhero show. It was a childhood trauma study, and almost none of you know any of this happened. Not speculation, real diagnostic criteria applied to Townsville's finest. We're going case by case. 4 files, 1 verdict. Let's move. Case File 1. Blossom. Compulsive perfectionism and parentification. Blossom is the leader, the smart one, the responsible one, and she is absolutely not okay. She wasn't born, she was manufactured. Her entire existence is the result of a laboratory accident. And from the moment she opened her eyes, she was assigned a role, the one who has it together. Not because she naturally has it together, because someone had to. The professor certainly wasn't going to do it. Blossom displays textbook compulsive perfectionism. She cannot tolerate disorder. She cannot delegate. She cannot fail. In a very special Blossom, she steals a set of championship golf clubs because the idea of not being the best, of not achieving perfection, is existentially unbearable. She doesn't steal for greed, she steals because imperfection feels like annihilation. What most people do not realize is that Blossom's ice breath isn't a superpower. It's emotional suppression made literal. She freezes things. She contains things. She's developed a power that literally stops motion, stops heat, stops life, because she has never been allowed to process her own emotions. The professor didn't teach emotional regulation. He taught her to lead, so she froze everything else. And the parentification. This is where it gets clinical. Blossom is 5 years old and she is the functional mother of her household. She manages her sister's schedules. She mediates their conflicts. She represents the family to the outside world. She does this while receiving zero emotional support from the adult in the house because the adult who created her has never processed the ethical implications of creating 3 daughters in a laboratory accident. In moral decay, Blossom becomes obsessed with the Tooth Fairy's financial reward system, and the obsession isn't about the money. It's about the system. She needs rules, structure, predictability, because her entire emotional foundation is built on a laboratory accident. She cannot trust anything that isn't systematic. That's not intelligence, that's a trauma response. Someone created a child, gave her superpowers, made her the leader of her sisters, and never once asked if she was overwhelmed. She was. She just froze it. That's Case File 1. Case File 2, Bubbles. Dissociative sweetness masking intermittent explosive disorder. Bubbles is the nice one, the soft one. She loves coloring her stuffed octopus and speaking in a voice so gentle it barely registers, and she can scream at a frequency that shatters buildings. Things get even crazier when you actually look at the pattern. Bubbles isn't sweet because she's naturally gentle. She's sweet because sweetness is the only survival strategy that worked. In a house with no mother and a scientist father who doesn't process emotions, the only way to get attention without superpowers is to be adorable. Blossom took leadership, Buttercup took aggression, Bubbles took performance. And the performance fractures under pressure. In Bubble Vicious, Bubbles is told she's too soft to be a real hero, and she doesn't just prove them wrong, she becomes genuinely terrifying. The hardness isn't a new skill she develops, it's what was always underneath. The sweetness is a mask. The capacity for violence is the reality. And the dissonance between her aesthetic, blue, pigtails, soft voice, stuffed animal, and what she's capable of is the clinical signal. What most people do not realize is that intermittent explosive disorder presents exactly like this in children with trauma backgrounds. The individual is calm, functional, even pleasant, until a threshold is crossed and then the response is wildly disproportionate to the trigger. Bubbles doesn't just get angry. She loses access to her own identity when anger takes over. The sweet girl is gone. Something else takes the wheel. And when it's over, she's back to coloring, as if nothing happened. That's not mood swings, that's dissociation. And here's the detail that seals the file. Bubbles speaks in a baby voice that is noticeably absent when she's fighting. The vocal register shift isn't natural development, it's context dependent. She performs innocence when it's safe. She drops it when violence is required. She has learned to code switch between harmless and dangerous because neither state was ever integrated into a single healthy identity. The professor never helped her integrate them. He was busy in the lab. That's case file 2. The sweet one is the scariest one, because you never know when she's going to stop performing. Case file 3. Buttercup. Oppositional defiant disorder with aggression as primary emotional language. Buttercup is the tough one, and she's not brave. She's incapable of expressing any emotion except anger. Let me say that again. Buttercup is not brave. Bravery requires the presence of fear and the choice to overcome it. Buttercup does not acknowledge fear. She doesn't process it. She doesn't name it. She converts every emotional input, fear, sadness, vulnerability, affection, uncertainty, you name it, into the only output her nervous system was permitted to develop: aggression. In Buttercrush, Buttercup develops a crush and has absolutely no framework for processing it. She doesn't know what the feeling is. She doesn't know what to do with it. Her response is to become more aggressive, to fight harder, to push harder, to retreat further into the only emotional register she was ever allowed to develop. The crush doesn't make her soft, it makes her dangerous, because softness is indistinguishable from threat in a nervous system that was never taught the difference. What most people do not realize is that Buttercup's origin story makes this outcome predictable. She was the third ingredient. Chemical X was added last. She was the afterthought. And in a household with no mother, no emotional modeling, and a father who communicates through scientific observation, the third child doesn't get attention by being sweet. Blossom already claimed leadership. She doesn't get attention by being adorable. Bubbles already claimed performance. She gets attention by being a problem. And she learned that lesson before she could walk. Buttercup's aggression isn't a personality trait. It's the only emotional language she was ever taught in a house where no one speaks any other language. And the professor, the man who created her, never noticed. He was too busy marveling at what he'd made to ask if what he made was okay. That's case file 3. Case file 4. The professor. Neglect by scientific abstraction. And now we arrive at the source. The point of origin. The man who created 3 daughters in a laboratory accident and never once considered they might need emotional development alongside physical protection. Professor Utonium is not malicious. That's what makes this worse. A malicious parent can be identified and condemned. Professor Utonium is something more insidious. He's scientifically oblivious. He treats his daughters like a successful experiment rather than 3 developing human beings who need attachment, emotional modeling, and psychological support. The evidence is systematic. He never addresses Blossom's obvious compulsive perfectionism because her perfection makes his life easier. He never addresses Bubble's dissociative episodes because the sweet mask is pleasant to be around. He never addresses Buttercup's inability to express emotions other than rage because rage is useful in combat. Every single psychological disorder in this household was functionally rewarded by the only adult present. Things get even crazier when you examine the ethical framework. Professor Utonium created 3 sentient human beings. They're not robots. They're not tools. They're not a science experiment. They are children, and they have no mother, no extended family, no community support structure, and no adult who sees them as anything other than fascinating results. He named them, dressed them, and deployed them as crime fighters before they were old enough to consent to the identity he'd assigned. In Knock It Off, the professor's old lab partner creates inferior Powerpuff copies that go rogue, and the ethical breach isn't that the copies exist. It's that neither scientist sees the creation of sentient beings as an act that requires ongoing responsibility. They treat life as an experiment. They treat daughters as data points. And the original 3 girls, the ones we've been diagnosing this entire video, are the product of exactly this mindset. They were created by a man who didn't think past the moment of creation. That's case file 4. The villain wasn't hiding in Townsville, he was making them breakfast. The villains as diagnostic mirrors. And here's the final piece, the one that makes the entire show collapse into coherence. The villains aren't random, they're mirrors. Mojo Jojo is what Blossom becomes without the structure of sisterhood. Narcissistic personality disorder, obsessive intelligence, total inability to connect with others. He was Professor's lab assistant before the accident. He was the first creation, and he was discarded. He is the version of Blossom that no one ever asked if he was okay. Him is the embodiment of unprocessed trauma, the thing the girls can never articulate. He's not a demon in the traditional sense. He doesn't destroy buildings, he destroys identity. He targets their psychological weaknesses because he is their psychological weaknesses externalized. Every fear they can't name, every wound they can't acknowledge, him is what happens when trauma goes unaddressed for long enough that it develops a personality. Princess Morbucks is what Blossom becomes without accountability. Entitlement without empathy, power without purpose, wealth as substitute for love. She is Blossom's shadow self, the leader who lost the reason to lead. They were never just villains, they were diagnostic evidence. The verdict. 4 case files, 1 origin point, 0 intervention. Blossom, compulsive perfectionism and parentification, untreated. Bubbles, dissociative coping with intermittent explosive episodes, masked rather than addressed. Buttercup, oppositional defiant disorder with alexithymia, rewarded for her aggression. The Professor, neglect by scientific abstraction, the root cause for all 3 diagnoses. They weren't superheroes, they were survivors. They were manufactured children who developed psychological armor because no adult ever helped them develop anything else. And every monster they punched was less dangerous than the man who created them and never once asked if they were okay. That's the record. Which case hit hardest? Blossom freezing her emotions so hard it became a literal superpower? Bubbles performing sweetness to survive? Or Buttercup being taught that rage was her only option? Drop it in the comments. And if you want more clinical breakdowns of the cartoons you grew up with, hit subscribe. There are files we still haven't opened yet.